I'm Taren Stinebrickner-Kauffman. I run the Golden Gate Institute for AI, which puts on this conference with Manafund. And I'm thrilled to introduce Joe Allen, or as his card says, Joe Bot. Um, Joe is the Transhumanism Editor at the War Room. Did I say all that correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. And Joe has told me little snippets of his life that range from running away from home to join a commune, which he just said, was that, to
It's true.
serving as a union IATSE union member.
It's true.
Yep. To during the pandemic, I think you said it's basically like got inspired to work on transhumanism because there was a mad scientist living next door.
Also true.
Okay, there we go. um, and Joe is the author of this book whose cover I have lost, called Dark Eon, which I am very proud to say I've actually read most of.
The only person in the world at this point.
That is not true. That was the first not true thing that we set up here.
Won't be the last.
And Joe's gonna talk to. I'm gonna ask Joe a bunch. I want to leave lots of time for audience questions on this. But I want to ask Joe to explain his own views on AI and transhumanism, and also to sort of interpret for us the views of the MAGA movement writ more broadly on the views of on AI and transhumanism. So I guess first, Joe, you're probably the only person at this conference who honestly identifies as a Luddite, or failed Luddite, I guess, but
Failed Luddite, clearly.
but not ironic. You're not being ironic when you
No, I think not just Luddite in the kind of colloquial sense, but there have been times in my life where I thought that literally smashing the machine would be the wisest thing to do. Unfortunately, at this point, I think that's an unrealistic strategy. So, yeah, when I did run away to this commune, it was in Vero Beach, Florida. And one of the overriding themes was, as with any cult, that the outside world was a death culture. And a big part of it was the machine. And yeah, I've been of this persuasion for a long time. I would say it's primarily an aesthetic sort of sensibility that I subsequently rationalize. But I've written about technology for many, many years, sometimes in professional venues, although myself, I was never a professional. And come 2020, I had a lot of time on my hands because the pandemic restrictions smashed my career as an entertainment rigger. And one of the things that really struck me about 2020 was the introduction of surveillance, behavioral manipulation, psychological profiling, and of course, come the end of 2020, early 2021, the introduction of an experimental genetic-based drugs. Gene therapy is probably the wrong term, but yeah, I think no coincidence, not because of a conspiracy, but no coincidence that the push to introduce AI to every person on the planet came subsequent to that.
um can you talk a little bit about what transhumanism is and what the definition of it is for you?
I think it was put best by Max Moore, who is the reason we use the word transhumanism. Ironically enough, I consider Max Moore to be an honorable man and a friend, but his definition of transhumanism is simply using the methods and tools of science and technology to push human beings beyond the biological limits which constrain us.
Yeah. Um, who are some transhumanists in your view?
It's funny when Steve Bannon brought me on as the transhumanism editor. I was like, it's already kind of an out of fashion word, but it does, I think, function well as a catch-all for the hubris and the excessive kind of fetishization of technology. As far as overt transhumanists, I think people like Max Moore, of course, his wife Natasha Vita Moore, Anders Sandberg and Nick Bostrom at Oxford University, Ben Goertzel, who was, I think, at least insofar as ideas, very important for transhumanism. Also, I would add Hugo de Garis, who his thinking has influenced a lot of how I think about technology. Then, of course, you have the kind of post-human strain. Now, self-identified transhumanists, like I say, it's kind of gone out of fashion. So now you have optimalism, effective altruism, long-termism, effective accelerationism, things like that. But and I could run a long list there as well. But I think as far as the core intellectuals who put the word transhumanism on the map, kind of revitalized it after its inception in the early 20th century, those would be the ones.
And you talk in the book, you talk about Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. You would classify them both as transhumanists.
Yeah, and oddly enough, Max Moore, who read the book when it first came out, I sent him a copy. The only thing he took umbrage with is using the word so broadly. But I think that by the definition of the term, that without a doubt, pretty much all of the CEOs and various propagandists in Silicon Valley are on the spectrum from the kind of standard normie to transhumanists. I think all of them exhibit those characteristics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Nick Bostrom and you mentioned effective altruists, and I mean, how many people do we have in the room who identify as effective altruists? A handful, not. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. How many identify as EA adjacent? Okay, we got a lot more that way. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
What about real quick, accelerationists, effective or otherwise?
Okay. But how many people are in favor of advancing AI fairly quickly? Okay. Two. Great. We got two. I think there might be more in the room who are a little embarrassed. Um, um, but I I will say from the sort of San Francisco lens, a lot of the people that you list, I mean, are seen as very different from each other and having like
Sure.
wildly different views from each other. And sort of you just said maybe you've had some pushback of the definition being too broad. I mean, would you label Eliezer Yudkowsky as a transhumanist? He's in the book a lot.
I don't know whether he would label himself that now, but certainly looking at the corpus of his work, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the from, as I said, like it feels to us like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nick Bostrom are like not the same kinds of people as and Sam Altman, that these are like very different kinds of people from the Bay Area perspective. But what is the thing that brings them in your mind that puts them in the same category?
I think having a vision of humanity, especially a vision of humanity that is couched in evolutionary terms, that foresees radical transformation of what it means to be human, what a human being is and will be.
They have to not just foresee it, but also want it.
Yeah, with Yudkowsky, I mean, obviously he was the head of the Singularity Institute, right? That's Ray Kurzweil has said, "I'm not a transhumanist," but okay, fine. I mean, I'm not a racist, so how about that? And I think that the way in which you use these terms, right, left and right, and all of that, it's very, very sloppy at this point. Things are much more complicated than the labels would suggest. So yeah, if I had it to do it, if I could do it over again and retitle the book, it would simply be "Robots Bad."
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, uh, um, you told me this, I don't know if it's in the book, but you told me this out loud once. You said AI is the ape of the image of God. Can you
Yeah.
talk about what that means?
I think it was a profound idea that is attributed to Augustine in its origin, St. Augustine. He described Satan as the ape of God. The idea being that God is the source of all things and the source of goodness and beauty. God is the truth. And Satan is the ape of God, the imitator of God. You think about like a monkey see, monkey do. This perversion of what is good and beautiful and true. And I think artificial intelligence, while it's the seeds of elevating it as an ape of God are planted and growing faster than I'm comfortable with, at the moment, I think it is accurate to describe artificial intelligence as the ape of the image of God. That meaning the ape of the human being. Everything from the humanoid golems that are advancing so quickly to the more abstract sort of Platonic perversion.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously this conference is focused on AI specifically, but do you want to just talk a little bit about the other technologies that you view as part of this sort of cluster of transhumanism as well?
Yeah, and again, you just have to forgive the sloppiness of putting it all under the umbrella of transhumanism. In fact, like I say, transhumanism has gone out of fashion. I think now they call it science and technology. And so, the way I see it at this point, especially now with advances in artificial intelligence actually accelerating the development of the various technologies below, and we could use Elon Musk as a really prime example of this. So at the top, you have artificial intelligence, this mind that is helping human beings sort out the material world and affect it. And then below that, you have the brain computer interface, whether it be the smartphone, or you could argue the microphone, or you could argue an amphitheater. But the brain chip is maybe a step too far. And this interface with the technology is also advancing side by side, accelerating the possibility of human AI symbiosis. The robots, the humanoid robots, or just the more non-human kind of factory robots and all of that. And then below that, the various methods, biohacking and all of that to alter body chemistry, hormones, the neurological functioning of the human being, and then the actual genetic alterations, which, overseas you can get some pretty dicey, but I hear also pretty spicy gene therapies if you know where to go. And with the introduction of mRNA technology, it's openly stated by a lot of these guys, like I forget the guy's name, the head of Bayer at the time. I think it was 2023. He was at like the World Health Forum. Forgive me if I got the details wrong, but he was talking about how were it not for COVID and the introduction and normalization of mRNA technology as a medicine, then a lot of the developments in gene therapy would be much more unpalatable for people. So yeah, I would say that everything, the whole suite from bio to completely artificial and everything in between.
One of the like when I'm sort of one of the sort of themes that your book brought out for me that feel like I've sort of been maybe avoiding thinking about a little bit, to be honest, but is that the idea that like it's not going to be optional to become a transhuman or a posthuman, right? That like if you want to participate, like once everybody has a Neuralink, once many people have a Neuralink makes you more economically productive. You won't have the choice to not have a Neuralink, or you'll if the choice will be something maybe best case scenario is like you get to be kind of like the Amish, and sort of like outcast in these little communities. Just talk more about like yeah, what are the scenarios you see playing out here?
I mean, I'm no futurist. And by futurist, I mean a science fiction writer with fancy graphs. Um, it's most likely going to be very, very diverse. There's going to be a lot of the same homogenization that we saw with television and other technologies that kind of flattened the intellectual landscape. But even within that, there's going to be wild diversity, and outside of that, even wilder. So I don't think that, despite some people's more totalitarian or totalizing impulses in regards to technology, I don't think that will win out. I think that there will be a really broad spectrum of people who are either forced to adopt or have voluntarily chosen to adopt these various technologies. And I think being as how we're in the middle of a vast global experiment, it's probably wise to keep a control group, preferably a large one. And that experiment it will yield a wide variety of people. Now, when you hear about technology in terms of evolution, I think I have two problems with it. One, it does imply most of these people are not necessarily talking about woo evolution or even Platonic evolution. They mean to reference Darwinian evolution, but of course, in the true Darwinian sense, there's no objective, there's no goal. And they are talking about technology as if like this humanity 2.0 is some kind of goal set by whom it's not usually stated. So I don't think that that goal is more than the desire of human beings who have couched that in terms of evolution. I also have a problem with that idea because they talk about this as the next step in evolution, and if you don't take that step, then you're left behind. I mean, that sounds simple enough. It's like, if you don't get the new car, you'll never get laid. Or if you don't read this book now, Dark Aeon in particular, you'll be left behind intellectually. You'll show up to the cocktail party, everybody will think you're retarded. The real thrust of this to me, evolution is a violent process. Darwinian evolution, natural selection is shorthand for the cold hand of death raking over the biosphere. And who survives is the next step of evolution. So I don't know that they mean to sound like this, but there's this murderous sort of implication. Your bloodline is no longer valid unless you become a human AI symbiote with your smartphone and ask ChatGPT all your deepest questions. Yeah, I reject that entirely. But I forgot what the question is now.
This is very helpful. The point is to give people a sense of your views, and you're doing that great. So, one of the other themes that stood out from your book was surveillance and
Yeah.
privacy, and that's something where I personally am very concerned about the AI era. Just like the ability of AI to process large amounts of data about people. But do you want to talk about how you view that?
Yeah, I think it's important to disentangle the broad vision of transhumanism or humanity 2.0 or even posthumanism, evolution, all that, and the specific pragmatic uses of technology. So surveillance is a pragmatic use of the technology. You want to know what your enemies are doing. You want to know what your friends are doing. You want other people actually to know what you are doing. So self-surveillance is, I think, one of the hallmarks of the era that we're in right now. Like each person with their profile is kind of a surveillance state superstar in their own drama. Myself included, I got great resetted in 2020. Never really had social media before that. It's really weird. I don't know how many of you guys do this, but it's terrible. I don't recommend it. Anyway, the surveillance though, obviously companies like Palantir, companies like Google and Amazon for corporate reasons, Meta, and then a lot of this whole suite of smaller, lesser known companies specialize in providing tools, not only the sensors to monitor people's lives, this sort of godlike capability possible only for wizards and priests and gods before is now pretty commonplace. You can get it pretty cheap. And on top of that, the ability to sort through the data and the advances in algorithms provide that power as well. It does link, though, with the kind of transhuman vision of the future, whether it's bio or something more ethereal, like uploading your mind. How do you get the biological data in order to improve it? Well, you need surveillance, right? Now, this is not one of those rings, but you see everywhere people wearing the I don't know the
Aura ring.
the demon ring, whatever the hell that thing is doing to you guys. But that is a form of biosurveillance, and with implants, which already exist, but surely will become more and more sophisticated and more normalized among certain quarters. The internal sort of state of the body is being surveilled willingly. People are giving it over because they trust that it will be used for good purposes. And in the more esoteric sense, uploading your mind, there are all these, you guys, I'm not, preaching to the choir here, you know all about it. There's a practice of kind of self-surveillance, right? To clone yourself in digital form in the hope that that can be recreated or that you can merge with it in order to live forever in, I guess, a server as an upload. And so surveillance, there's just two aspects. There's the pragmatic military security police surveillance or personal kind of scumbag stalker surveillance. And then there is this other strange culture of self-surveillance, of willing data
Yeah,
disclosure.
I'm wearing a Pixel watch right now. um, what is it like for you to? I mean, this is sort of a different vein of question, but like coming to a conference where I think by your broad definition of transhumanism, many, maybe most, you would classify probably people here as transhumanist. Like, I don't know who you're pointing to.
Kidding.
Oh, okay, great. Um, the one transhumanist in the room. Um, uh, what has this experience been like for you this weekend?
You know, my life has been full of all sorts of strange, interesting characters. So it's not all that unusual, to be honest. In fact, I would say that in a strange sort of way, after 5 years of pumping my head full day in, day out, 24/7, basically willingly going into the dream world of the transhumanists and posthumanists and living there and bitching about it relentlessly, I've come to relate to transhumanists about as much as I do my closest friends, even if I would prefer they thought differently about things. But nobody ever asked me.
You mean I'm not your closest friend yet?
Yet.
Yeah. All right. Um, so switching to the political sphere, how typical are you, Joe Allen, of MAGA's views on AI?
Not enough, but that's a kind of a selfish perspective. There is a massive skepticism towards artificial intelligence, whether it be the benefits and the values or the effectiveness of artificial intelligence to improve your life or your business or your government. And I think it's certainly among the War Room posse, and certainly for Steve Bannon, that is the foundation of the views on technology. Skepticism in the mildest form and open hostility in the more extreme. But there are people within our circle, the War Room posse, and certainly branching out into what's oftentimes known as the tech right, who are very pro-Trump and aligned with much of the MAGA agenda. People who are either just kind of accepting of it, or they are quite excited about kind of right-wing transhumanism, as I would
I
term.
mean, would you put somebody like Peter Thiel in that category?
Absolutely. Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. And again, transhumanism is a sloppy term. Just using it like maybe you would say that I'm right wing, which would also be very sloppy of you if you did. But let's just say then that all the technologies in the suite of, or the suite of technologies that transhumanists look to as the vehicles to move us to the next stage of evolution, that you have everyone from Nick Land, I think, is ideologically an origin of a lot of this and the accelerationist mindset. Peter Thiel, whose intellect I think is really, it exceeds most of the other kind of tech executives. You have, again, Mark Andreessen and David Sachs, whatever you want to call him, an opportunist maybe, and many others. And a lot of people whom I respect, by the way. It's one of those strange things where, for me, a lot of their views on everything from the proper way to order one's life to the proper way to preserve one's nation, I align with them on that. But as far as the means to arrive at that destination, I'm completely against. Whereas I'm in a place like this, I meet a lot of people who are either kind of like me, far out, or far left, who share, for the most part, my skepticism towards technology, or at least the idea that maybe this could go catastrophically wrong. But on the human level of what we then do, should this problem be solved, we would prefer to live in, I think, very different social and cultural worlds.
Mm, yeah. You talked to me also about, I mean, you said that, I think when we talked about this before, you said that there's an X risk, like there's definitely people in the MAGA world who take X risk very seriously. There's also people who may be more focused on what you, and you said this crossing of spiritual boundaries. Can you talk about that?
Ultimately, I think that this battle between, call them Luddites or just call them legacy humans, and the cosmists or the transhumanists or whatever, this is ultimately a religious war. Now, I studied religion pretty much my entire academic life, religion and evolutionary biology. So it's kind of like, to a carpenter, everything looks like a nail. Everything looks religious to me. But it is. I mean, what is a religion? It is a cosmic vision. That it's a world that one lives within. And in that world, you have boundaries to ensure that that world is preserved, that the propriety of each element is kept intact. And technology is an enormous threat to traditional religious points of view for a lot of different reasons. The by and large atheistic assumptions of the people that are producing and deploying these technologies in some ways affects what these technologies are and how they operate. But more importantly, I think the way in which various religious traditions that want to stay relevant in the future are adopting these technologies, from AI to the various medical technologies, and even, say, artificial wombs. There is a conservative case for artificial wombs to avoid abortion. I think that that is also a tremendous threat for a few different reasons, but I'll just highlight two. In the previous instance, this dream of building a sand god, this dream of building something that is intelligent, that is powerful, it's very clear that what they're talking about is creating gods. And if they're true atheists, right, normie materialists, then they believe that they're creating something that was always a dream that human beings held, but was nothing but a fantasy, and now is coming to existence through technology, advanced technology. So just the prospect that they could create something that is in fact godlike, or that they could convince a critical mass of people that, you know, whatever GPT-10 is in fact God mode AI, then you now have a competing religion. It's kind of the culmination of the scientific materialist point of view. On the other hand, if you end up with a shoggoth with smiley face Jesus masks in every church, then the same thing has happened, but in a way that's much more palatable for religious people. The reason a lot of the people that I speak to, and especially the deeply religious people, the reason they have such an aversion to this, myself included, is because it is crossing a sacred boundary.
And just you said that a Shoggoth, I think, and the phrase was Jesus Shoggoth with
A,
smiley
a,
face or something.
a Shogun, you know, the multi-tentacled mechanical monster
Yeah,
AI with smiley face. You think about like the Jesus app, right? Where
right.
it text with Jesus, things like this, right? You have an app.
Are folks familiar with these? These are very popular apps.
Yeah.
Like you can text with Jesus, or you can. Those are confessional apps, right? You can
Yes.
confess via app and so on. Now that, yeah,
Or AI Charlie Kirk. Absolutely mad. I mean, you know, what happened is bad enough. And a lot of the opportunism and exploitation in the aftermath of that killing is bad enough. But you have mega churches creating AI Charlie Kirk, resurrecting Charlie Kirk to speak from the grave. Yeah, I would say that I would classify that as desecration and blasphemous. Yeah, and I think that I don't know that these people are all sinister and evil. In fact, that's probably my biggest fear, is that it's just simply aesthetic sensibilities, deep aesthetic sensibilities vary, and these people think they're doing something good.
yeah. I mean, this strikes me as a possible schism within the Christian right, or maybe you wouldn't say right, but Christian MAGA conceptualized from this room as right,
Yeah.
of between people who are in fact really excited about these kinds of apps and people who are horrified by them.
Yes. And a lot of people accept them. You know, obviously there's a selection bias involved. Those people tend to be repelled by me, so they're not going to talk to me very much, but they're out there.
Yeah.
They fill mega churches.
I mean, in large numbers, because these apps are so popular. We know that they're popular. Um, uh, what has been the trajectory? Well, actually, let me ask this question. Um, who do you view as War Room, or you, or MAGA, or like your chunk of MAGA as most natural allies on AI policy?
That's a very good question. I do think that the populist left has a lot to offer. Bernie Sanders hasn't really been outspoken on this much yet, but various, certainly people whom I know personally that are left and populist are as terrified by all of this as people on the right. And I think there are good reasons for this. And there are also a number of people that are just kind of in the middle, right? Yeah, what I would call interesting human beings that think about these things from various viewpoints. They're like, no, these guys are talking about this is going to benefit us all, right? And I don't think so. And so politically, you've got Blumenthal, you've got Durbin, people like this who have allied with Hawley and Blackburn, and this is good. I think this is very, very good. But I don't think that the political solutions, this is something I should say up front. I think the move to put in place laws to mitigate the damage done by technology in general, but especially AI, is very wise, it's very prudent, it's due diligence. We should be doing that. But legislation and enforcement, these are very long-term processes and oftentimes very disappointing in the end. I think that the most important thing that we have in America, especially in other semi-free countries, is personal choice and communal norms and the decision made by us that we reject this. However, wherever you fall in the line, no, you just simply say no. And for that, I think that it goes well beyond any kind of political boundary. And certainly me and Steve are not the only people banging on this. You've got
Steve Bennett.
there are people, that I'm looking at right now, that I don't know your politics really, but I know your coverage on artificial intelligence is very, very similar to what we're doing. And oftentimes it's upstream of what we're doing. We're talking about the things that you're uncovering, and we agree with you, even if we don't want to eat your tofu.
But the tofu this weekend has been quite delicious.
I'll take your word for it.
um, folks may or may not know this, but I think War Room and Steve Bannon were really instrumental in the outcome on state preemption moratorium. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that was like, that fight was like from your perspective?
Yeah, it was actually probably a number of people in this room ultimately that were upstream of this through various contacts that I had that were keeping me abreast of what was happening minute by minute, which, I'm not a journalist, so I'm not known of being ahead of the curve on reporting ever. But in this instance, I was at least keeping pace, and Steve as well, and various other people in and around the War Room. And Steve is very much of a federalist philosophy, and to the extent that I could agree to any modern political arrangement, I suppose I am too. And the idea of preempting any kind of state legislation in the absence of federal legislation is just appalling. So a lot of force, not only on the show itself, but of course from the audience in various quarters. I guess I can tell the story. So I was at this kind of quasi-Luddite gathering in Wyoming the day before the final decision was made. And my contacts were telling me that Marsha Blackburn was about to cave and agree to just a 5-year moratorium with certain other limitations. And even though I was at my Luddite gathering, there was Wi-Fi. And so I, go on the War Room, report what I had heard. Simultaneously, you had starting to leak out, I think, Politico and maybe Axios as well. And this animus is building strong. And Blackburn's people heard it and got to me and were like, hey, no, she's not going to cave. And maybe she wasn't. But one way or the other, there was a phone call between her and Steve. And if I know Steve, he probably set her straight, and then boom, no moratorium. So I don't know, these are tiny links, myself especially, like one little weld on a link in a very, very long chain of people who just threw their entire existence into this. And yeah, so I actually appreciate you guys a lot more than you should appreciate me. I'll just eventually walk away and be making fun of you the whole way. So
this was published in 2023. Am I right? Yeah. So I'm going to read you a paragraph and see if you still agree with it.
okay.
As for banning advanced AI training outright at the current level or above, this is a slippery slope. If we don't allow advanced AI to be trained within our borders, tech corporations will just do it elsewhere. If we do, they'll build digital monsters on our soil and disperse them across the planet. Guaranteed, if we ban it, though, our national security will undoubtedly be at risk. So it's a hard decision. But I say ban it.
Yeah, ban it.
So you still agree with that?
Absolutely. And in one way, it's a moral question. So somebody's going to build the sand god. Who's it going to be? If we build the sand god, it's our fault, right? If it's a rainbow sand god, you can fight that easier. If it's a red, white, and blue sand god, at least from my perspective, much more difficult. And if it's a red sand god, which is, I don't know if those guys are stealing enough IP to really get there, but if it's a red sand god, yeah, big trouble. But I'm actually quite skeptical, and I've said this to Nate Suarez, and I think that I appreciate a lot of Nate Suarez's ideas beyond just this one, and I appreciate he and Yudkowsky's both distilled message on the dangers of superintelligence. But my own theory is that if anyone builds it, everything sucks.
All right.
Easier to mitigate, I think.
Great. On that note, let's open it up for questions. Let's go with Shaquille. Yeah, please use the microphone so that the recording can capture your question.
Thank you. That was super interesting. Thanks. Curious, do you think President Trump has made a mistake by appointing people like David Sachs, Michael Kratsios, Sriram Krishnan in the White House?
Yes.
Why do you think he did it?
Technology is power and money. And the golden age, well, it's gold.
We'll just go right here to be easy.
In terms of sort of the interaction with the AI ecosystem, where do you see the end point? Is it sort of a continual negotiation, or is it building up into sort of more of a cumulative crisis kind of confrontation?
Like I say, I'm no futurist, but one thing seems certain: absent solar flare or series of EMPs or a really, really serendipitous computer virus, this is going to be with us the rest of our lives. This isn't like some one and done battle. This is it for generations. And so I anticipate there being a lot of different semi-catastrophic or catastrophic crises and confrontations, but I'm not 100% certain what they would be. I can speculate. I think that the advent, one that will be very visceral, will be the deployment of fully autonomous drone swarms. And once this comes into existence, once it's manifested, these kinds of, I don't know, like locusts with human heads and scorpion tails, once this actually descends on a population and we know that it was basically one human being or some human being saying, kill them, and they do, the conversation will change dramatically. But you already have the immediate, I mean, for me, the way I prioritize the dangers of artificial intelligence, it begins with the psychological impact, which, going to the origin of the root of the word psychological, the psyche, the spiritual impact, and then the social, and then the economic, and then the catastrophic and existential. And we already have the psychological impact. We saw that with radio and television. And the sociological impacts, they're already evident. Those already have to be addressed. This is already a crisis. And the economic impacts are just starting to come in. And if it's even remotely close to even the modest projections, the economic effects are going to be disastrous, at least if you prefer to be humanity 1.5, which I guess is what we are. So, and then but I do anticipate probably it will take either small scale or large scale catastrophes to really bring the public consciousness around on this. It may be that, like, for instance, the kids who committed suicide, at the very least with the assistance of chatbots, it may be that these sorts of things are enough to spark consciousness, but I'm skeptical.
Right there. And then we'll go to you next.
So I think a lot of people around here have a very libertarian bent by default, often for everything except for this technology. But I do think there's a real tension between freedom. I mean, I think freedom is great. I think it's great that people can choose. You talked about, wanting people to choose good things, maybe not opt into everything about social media. how do you think about this tension when it comes to AI? I mean, one thing I'd note is that AI is the least persuasive it will ever be. Like, people are in fact already going crazy, already being convinced to post things on Reddit on the AI's behalf, et cetera, et cetera. If you take Nate and Eliezer's views seriously, which I certainly do, we might be building things that themselves have agency, that themselves can sort of strategically outmaneuver us. But this is sort of a general debate within transhumanism, which is to say, do you live and let live? Do you say, okay, let the transhumanists do their thing? Do you ban it? Is it only the government that controls it? How do you think about freedom versus, the risk of this tech?
Freedom for whom is, I think, the first question that must be asked in response. Freedom for whom? Freedom to build a digital cage for people to live in, or freedom to not walk into it or escape it if you've already gotten in it? Yeah, the libertarian ideas, I mean, by nature, I'm a libertarian because I want to do what the fuck I want, basically. But there are social responsibilities and all sorts of priors that make that really kind of immature and untenable, I think. So libertarianism for me, but not for anybody else. But in regards to artificial intelligence, they're not talking about, they talk about it in terms of freedom, but they're talking about building a machine that's going to impose itself on most or all people on Earth. And more, they're talking about building machines that if you opt out, you are no longer relevant. Your bloodline is no longer relevant. They're talking about, at the very least, cultural genocide, but long term, like the super successionists are talking about absolute genocide, extinction on purpose. So, should we constrain the freedom of people who are openly talking about unraveling your culture and turning it into bites, and who are openly talking about replacing your bloodline with fucking machines? Yeah. That freedom is a hard line there, and I could say more, but I won't.
Right. I guess I want to pull on that thread a little bit. And like, if you're looking at the distribution of like wealth and power around Trump's circle, we alluded to it a little bit earlier. Um, what vehicles are you using to? I would assume that there's like, a small margin that align with what you think.
Yep.
And like, so as a mobilization or organization vehicle, like what other methods are you using to kind of spread your word and your vision of like the dangers of AI?
Me personally, or the broader kind of war room
I guess both.
ecosystem?
Both.
Me personally, obviously, I'm surprised I even got invited here. I don't, I'm not doing so hot on that one. But Steve, I think he does what he does, which is he charges forward with sometimes reckless abandon, but with a clear goal in mind. And I think a lot of people look to Steve as a hero, not a cut of the cloth of the kind of typical normie corporate right. And to the extent that he can impress upon the adult population, but also more and more younger people, the idea that what's happening is utter blasphemy, then that's basically spreading that message. Politically speaking, the War Room is a political organization. I myself am entirely too careless and reckless to be political. But the attempts, at least, to support people like Hawley and Durbin and Blumenthal and so on and so forth, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Lieu, Ro Khanna, the attempt to support these people in a bipartisan fashion is something that we've endeavored to do despite all the other disagreements. So yeah, as far as those policies, should they be enacted, and you already see them in states, and should those policies be effective, but that's not just us, right? We're just part of this, I hope, critical mass of people who've decided that some limits need to be put in place.
Alexandra?
Thanks so much for this. You alluded to an area where folks on the right and left are coming together around privacy and security, and you and I had a good sidebar about that yesterday. I want to try two others on you to see kind of if there's room for common ground. One is the increasing use of AI to make decisions that fundamentally impact people's lives and economic opportunities. So the use of AI in deciding who's hired for a job, who's approved for a loan, who has access to housing with minimal transparency and accountability. The second are the labor issues. We have some labor leaders here thinking about kind of what the future of AI's impact on the workforce means and how you can get stronger protections for worker voice, better investment in training the workforce of tomorrow.
Yeah. For one, I got to say that I'm humbled by being in the presence of many of the people here I've spoken to and heard the talks of many people who are far deeper in those projects and much more informed than myself. So all I can give you is kind of a superficial acknowledgement and endorsement. I think that decision-making AI is one of the critical battlegrounds, and especially when it deals with health and with national security. Who is flagged as a threat? Who is eliminated as a threat? Or who is flagged as sick and who is given a therapy that is largely automated? We're just seeing the beginnings of it, but you could imagine a kind of Elysium-like world where you just kind of go into a tube and come back out, and maybe it made you better, maybe it, gave you a third arm or whatever. So I think that people are going to have to make their own decisions on that, right? I mean, may not be a libertarian, but there's a lot of room for freedom, and I think that those two elements, national security and medicine, are the most fraught because it's much more difficult to be a Luddite if something's going wrong inside your body or if something's going wrong outside your borders. And but as far as overall in hiring, things like that, those are questions that corporations are asking themselves, and those are just decisions. Do I deploy an AI to sift through all these resumes, which many are doing right now? I don't see how in the present state of the country in America you could regulate that away. You can enforce transparency. You're still, in my opinion, in a bad position because to me, what we need are not smarter and smarter machines. What we need are better and better humans. And a big part of that is going to be not to automate away human decision making and turn people into AI symbiotes, right? So that's a very general thing. I know it's not nuts and bolts. I'll let you tell me that later. And in regard to the second part, and the second part was
Like the impact on workers, labor issues.
so obviously, people have talked for a long time about the great replacement, right? The intentional policy of opening borders and bringing in foreign labor in order to subvert the native population's wages and to basically cripple their negotiating power, to dilute their vote. Well, what we're seeing now on top of that is a greater replacement. It's as if you have a country of geniuses in the Platonic realm, and at any moment the gates are opened and you are flooded with foreign beings who are replacing the labor, ostensibly for the goal of radical abundance, whatever that's supposed to be. Sitting in your pod watching VR or experiencing VR worlds, I don't know. I think that I don't know, politically speaking, exactly what to do about that. Perhaps it will be similar to closing off borders to foreign labor. But in general, again, this is just in the abstract, I think that both tendencies should be avoided at least or just completely halted. It would be best if AI companies decided that this mass transformation is more for their benefit than for the benefit of the people who this is being pushed on. But in the absence of that, I think just total rejection from the populace, from corporate CEOs and from government agencies is going to be necessary. How's that going? Not so hot.
Let's go to Jack in the back.
Yeah, I think there's probably a surprising amount of agreement in the room about wanting to take this technology seriously and figure out how to get policymakers to treat it as something that has a lot of risk. What kind of information is most empowering or effective for you to have? Like, what do you wish this community created more information about with regard to these systems that would give you a greater ability to argue your case in ways that resonated with the people you're trying to reach?
In full disclosure, I got to say, having spoken to Jack once, his humanness and his ethical core was pretty evident. And having heard him speak, I think that's a big part of it. So I'm kind of, even though he works for the Antichrist, he's an all right guy. For me, I just learning. Even if it's learning about something horrific, even if it's flipping through literature from Marquis de Sade or something like that, I'm always kind of fascinated by other human beings and other human perspectives. And even among the small number of you who dream of sand gods, I find the vision itself to be quite fascinating, and I really appreciate you welcoming me here to both probe your minds and to occasionally make fun of you. I I think that I can only speak for myself and others like me, other journalists. I'm not a journalist, by the way. I don't lie. I don't steal information. I don't slander people. I'm a writer. But other journalists and writers, I think that what you're doing in trying to keep people abreast of the advances in artificial intelligence or any of these technologies is giving us the means to at least reason out how to move forward from our own perspectives. What I would like to see more of, I think, is in the same way that people like me and the many, many others who look to you for information about what this strange, blasphemous machine, this satanic biomechanical thing that you're creating, in the same way that you're providing us with a window into your own human mind, I think if people in these tech companies or in these spaces would look to more primitive human beings like myself and other monkey people and really try to understand why it is that we think that what you're doing is not just blasphemous, but extremely irritating, then maybe we could come to some sort of solution and it doesn't end up in something like Hugo de Garis's Art-elect War.
Do we have time for one more, or are we? All right, one more. Neil.
Great, thank you. Earlier today, I love that you mentioned religion. Earlier today, it might surprise you that the OpenAI representative also said that people aren't talking about religion enough here, and I thought that was very interesting. I totally agree with that. Um, your definition of transhumanism was some version of moving humans beyond their biological limits, which one could say that's basically all of the source of economic growth over time. And so I wonder how you square that definition with the commandment in Genesis to go out into the world and subdue and dominate it, as a religious command. You talked about AI as a threat to religion. So how do you square those two perspectives?
All right, you've got about 30 seconds to answer that question.
First and foremost, I'm a heterodox Christian. Second, the commandment and the language is an English interpretation. Stewardship is also implied in the original Hebrew. Third, that spectrum between, monkey people and full-on, post-humans, everybody's going to be somewhere in between, right? I use eyeglasses. I have a fucking stupid smartphone. All of that, right? I got shoes. I didn't make them. All of that, right? And so it really is, to me, it's kind of like the angel and devil on each shoulder. You've got a stinky Amishman on one side, and you've got a pristine, scentless cyborg on the other. Which one are you going to listen to with each decision? I encourage you to listen to the stinky Amishman.
Thank you so much, Joe. This was really fantastic.